The science of mantra is one of the greatest and profoundest spiritual treasures of humanity. Mantra in various forms has been practiced and is practiced by cultures across the world, whether it is the Eastern Orthodox Christian Jesus prayer, the Catholic tradition's rosary, the Islamic tradition of the recitation of the divine names of Allah, are examples from theistic traditions of the Abrahamic stream of spirituality, of which we can define as mantra. But it's when we go to India, Tibet, Mongolia, and the Central Asian region, as well as Vietnam and Japan, of course, China, and Korea, that the use of mantra is taken to its most developed and sublime form. And what is central to this, of course, is the science of Tantra, the ancient tradition of Tantra. Tantra being, of course, the spiritual path, the Tantrayana, the vehicle of Tantra. And Tantra is about transformation. We can transform ourselves through yogic practices such as breath control, physical motions, mudras, gestures, but we can also do it through the practice of sound. And in ages past, access to these traditions was severely limited. You had to find a teacher first. You had to find the means by which you could survive, often living in near beggary, and you then practiced and practiced, hoping eventually for these teachings to be revealed. But in the last 40 to 60 years, there has been a great transformation in Western and world spirituality, where these teachings, the teachings of the Mantrayana, the path of mantra, has been revealed with great freedom and generosity, aided by both practitioners who have learned to speak and read the source languages and to translate, but also of teachers of these traditions who have learned to speak and understand the psychology of people in cultures outside of their own, most notably in the West. And so there is a huge amount of material out of there, sometimes very difficult to wade through, sometimes loaded with highly technical language. But there's also a lot of stuff out there that is easily accessible to people of differing levels of intellect and interest. But what is central to the practice of mantra is the idea that you use sound and the production of that sound to effect a spiritual and psychological transformation. In many of the texts, they do say that you should recite the mantra at the very least to a volume which from your mouth to your ear can be heard. Now, many Western practitioners, when they begin to do mantra, especially if they're doing it in a group setting, tend to not do this, more out of fear that they're not going to get it right, without understanding, which the teachers telling them would happily tell them, the fact that we're all born is a sign usually that we didn't get it right anyway, so don't worry about that. It's kind of a little trick to try and get people to go, don't take yourself so seriously. We're all in the same boat, the same yana. Do the practice, and all of that will pass it by. And so we're left going, well, what mantra should I say? What's most effective? Oh my goodness, is this mantra greater than that mantra? And the answer is no. It really doesn't matter. What actually matters is that you explore and understand yourself. And from that understanding and that exploration, come to connect very often with a deity or a bodhisattva or a Buddha. And by learning about the meaning of the mantra, because mantras are condensed formulas containing quite profound teachings within them, but also by gaining greater familiarity and in fact getting that emotional fulfillment that comes from spiritual practice, the result of the mantra begins to manifest. But as Garab Dorje taught in his teaching, The 3 Words That Liberate, the first of the 3 words is to choose. You must choose a mantra. Jumping around from mantra to mantra to mantra is nice and useful, but at the core, if you wish to achieve real results, then focusing on one mantra, taking that as your practice, becomes essential to achieving the goal. Now, if you are following the more modern tradition, familiar with New Age Aquarian and Western psychotherapeutic spiritual paths, then you will be using affirmations, and these things don't really apply to you because it's all about reciting the affirmation and affecting the internal transformations, such as feeling more positive, connecting more positivity, seeing the world in a different way. But if you have a more spiritual bent within yourself, then the use of mantras can be quite profound, whether you choose mantras from a theistic or a non-theistic, that is a God-based tradition or a non-God-based tradition. And in that, I think of most of the Buddhist traditions are non-theistic, but there are theistic traditions such as the Tibetan Bon, the Hindu traditions, and the Jain tradition, the Sikh traditions, who all practice mantra to some degree. But once you have chosen it through a practice of discovery and of learning, and a mantra has taken hold, then we move to the second of Garab Dorje's words, which is to practice. And what this basically means is do it. Doing it does not involve yourself necessarily mindlessly just saying the mantra. There is an element of that in practice, but the need for practice sessions is essential if you are to get something out of this. So creating intent, making a sacred space, that is a space, whether it be just drawing a circle around yourself on the beach and staring out at the sun as it rises or sets or the waves, or whether it's by having a shrine room or a place of practice. This is something you need to work on because our circumstances are all different. But ultimately what we are trying to do is to go, at this moment, all I am going to do is do this practice. Oftentimes, the use of mantra requires visualizations, visualizing the deity, visualizing a mandala, a yantra, sacred space, doing mudras. You know, if you've ever seen statues of Hindu deities, Jain deities, Buddhas, they all have different mantras. There is the teaching mantra, there is the mantra of generosity, there is the mantra of peace and greeting, there is the mantra, the mudra goes on and on and on. But ultimately, this is tied to the recitation of mantras, of sacred phrases, which give rise to transformation of our own inner nature. So, how we say that in Tantra, it's very often to undertake preliminary practices where you recite mantras 108 or 111,000 times, alongside with visualizations and focus and practice. And this is a big number. But really all you're doing is raking the field. You're preparing it. So that with each mantra, you are planting a seed. And then with the next recitation, you are watering the seed. And what is this seed? The seed is our own spiritual realizations, which lead to transformation. And so, with this, we then arrive at the third of Garab Dorje's advice, his 3 words that liberate upon hearing, which of course is to perfect. We have first choose, practice, perfect. And the perfection stage is the actual practice, where each time we do it, it becomes a bit easier. Understanding the meaning of the mantra then becomes ingrained within us, so that when we say the mantra, we know what it means. That we perfect the ritual actions and gestures, whether they are from a received tradition or you have come to realize them, then we perfect them. And the perfection itself is the realization, the actual manifestation of your own mind opening itself and realizing the fruit of the practice which you have been doing. Now, do you have to do these huge recitations? No. But they're a truly powerful way of connecting and of anchoring ourselves into the practice, and can lead to levels of understanding not possible by a casual overview or by the recitation to get momentary spiritual highs. Chapa Rinpoche, the Bön teacher, resident in Los Angeles and San Francisco, once taught that he, coming from that tradition of large recitations, sometimes wondered if it was really so necessary, that if people instead focused on reciting the mantra with meaning or reciting the mantra carefully and with beauty, that this could be as equally profound as the recitation of huge numbers, the performing of spiritual Olympics, as one other teacher famously referred it to. And really, I agree with him, but I agree with him having come from having recited many hundreds of thousands of recitations of mantras and practices. And I get great depth from the recitation of large numbers, but sometimes slowing down and just robing yourself in the mantra can be an incredibly profound and transformative act in itself. And in this, there is no right or wrong. This is about what works for you. the deities or mental structures and concepts and philosophies that speak to me will not necessarily speak to you. The way I approach mantra will be profoundly different, possibly, from the way you approach it. Neither is right nor wrong. What matters is what works for you and what transforms you. And in that, you begin by the joyous practice of just exploring and playing with mantras. And I don't mean, just being silly about it, though those of you who embrace the path of the goddess Eris may challenge me on this. But sometimes embracing that playful nature with mantra can be truly, truly pleasurable in itself. I remember in the early hours after a very, very big party in Canberra in Australia, there were 3 of us who were left. Everyone else had left. And the 3 of us who were left had a great love of folk music. Especially Celtic and Anglo-Saxon folk music. I was going through quite a phase at the time. And we greeted the new day by chanting the Om Mani Padme Hum, but chanting it to folk tunes. And in so doing, each of us took a different part, as in a vocal part, but we recited the mantra. And by this practice, we created a mandala of sound, which remains as one of the seminal spiritual moments of my life, of which I can look at it and go, that was a transition moment, born of the recitation of this mantra, but done in such a way that it spoke to us. I remember my time as a Buddhist monk, there was a group of us who truly loved Byzantine and Gothic plain chant. And for our teacher, we recited the Heart Sutra in Tibetan, but we did it using a traditional Gothic plain chant. And then we did it using the Mozarab chant, a form of chant that I particularly am attached to. And the teacher looked at us and said, this is beautiful. It's not Tibetan, but that doesn't change the fact I can feel the beauty and the power of this. This is almost like a terma, a hidden treasure. Why don't you do this more? And in that, each of us becomes a stone, a pebble in the path by which the science of mantra moves from its origins into new homes, and in those homes gives itself to new expressions. Does that mean that you start from the point of view of just ignoring the ocean of tradition and practice from which it comes? No, you need that. But should that stop you from giving expression? No, because the path to awakening is individual to each one of us. So in your journey, I pray that you find the mantra that speaks to you, and it may be more than one, and that it begins the process of transformation through which you emerge anew again, refreshed, robed in beauty, and open to the process of awakening that waits for us all as the next step in our great journey of evolution. It is my hope that each of you finds your own path. I am Dr. Shimon de Valencia, the Merry Mystic, and I look forward to hearing you on your own journey.